Okay, so friends, I'm really excited about today because we're going to talk about plants and gardens. And today's topic is, how does your garden grow? So we're going to start off with our usual introduction. Then we're going to talk about how plants grow. We're going to talk about common garden plants that you might see. And then we're going to go through our activities and some resources. So for your introduction, you guys know this, all the usual stuff. I'm Megan, and I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom, and I work at scientist.com, but I also really like to garden. So I have a lot of plants outside.
Hello, Megan.
Oh, hello. So I have a lot of plants and things outside on my patio, and I used to have a really big garden at my house, and so that's part of why I'm talking to you guys today. And I'm also talking to you about gardening today because it's about time for all of us to start planting things. And so these are some cool maps that you can find online, and they are the plant hardiness zones. So there's one for Europe there, and then there's one for the US. And the different zones have to do with the different climates. And so these maps can really help you understand when it's time to start planting your things outside. So I would encourage all of you to look this up and see where you live and what the plant hardiness zone is. And then you can know if it's okay to start planting seedlings and things outside yet, or if it's okay to take your plants outside.
Mommy?
Yes.
What happened for me is it's cut out twice and not during like the homework.
Oh,
it's cut
okay.
out twice since you've been doing the slides.
Okay.
Your voice is glitched.
Okay, thanks for letting me know, bud. So if you look at the hardiness zone map, you can see where I used to live in Wisconsin, which is right here where this arrow is. It's pretty blue, so the low temperatures are really cold. But now where I live in California, which is over here, it's an orange color, so the low temps are a lot different. So there's a lot of different plants that can grow where I live now versus where I lived before. And I can also leave a lot of my plants outside all winter, which is really different. So it's important to know what plants grow best where you live. And then Carmen and Inez, you guys are over here, I think, in one of these orange guys, right? So your zones might be a little bit different, but you guys can check it out depending on where you live. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how plants grow. And plants actually grow in kind of a cycle or a circle. And we're going to start with when seeds germinate, which is the kind of the start of seed growth. Then we're going to talk about the plant growing, it having flowers, fruiting, releasing seeds, and then dying. And so there's a couple different ways you can look at it when you want to see how plants grow. And a lot of people start from the seed and then go up, but I really like to go in this circle. I think it's important to note that it's cyclical, or it goes in a cycle. So it kind of never ends, or it can never end if you take care of plants correctly. So starting out with seeds, all the plants that you see around you have started their life as a seed, and without seeds, there wouldn't be any plants on the earth, and it would be kind of a dry, open place. And it probably wouldn't even support us or support other life, right? Because lots of animals and things need to eat plants. And
in our vegetable garden, we also have flowers, and we have cosmos and zinnias.
Oh, I love zinnias. Those are very pretty. So I think I might be showing you some of those a little bit later. But the seeds of all those plants actually look really, really different. And they're usually pretty small, and some are really tiny. They're just little specks almost. And despite how small they are, they actually include all the food and the instructions necessary for the plant to sprout or to start its life. So there's actually energy and nutrients and things that are stored within that seed. And you can see some of the different flower seeds here. As an example, you can see the coleus has really tiny little dots, almost like poppy seeds, if you've ever seen those on a muffin. Those are a seed, they're very small. And then all the way up to sunflower seeds, which we know can be pretty big and that we actually eat, right? And then here's a zinnia seed. These look a little bit bigger, and they are, but they're actually really flat. So seeds have a lot of different shapes and forms, but they all have kind of the same function, which is to start the life of the plant. And when those seeds are ready to grow, it's called germination. So germination is the process where an organism or a plant grows from a seed or a similar structure, and then it sprouts. So when it germinates, it kind of includes all of the processes from the taking up of water, or the seeds kind of suck in water. And that part is really important because it allows the seed coat, or kind of the shell of the seed, to break open. And when that happens, it allows something to start growing out, which is called the radicle. And then it gets usually 2 little starter leaves that are called the cotyledons. And that's pretty much the step of germination. So you can see here's a dry seed. Here it's taking up water. And then you can see here it's split open and some of the plant is starting to grow out of it. And you can see it even more in depth here. So if you see the little green part here, that's the seed coat, or kind of like the jacket or the shell of the seed. And when the inside of the seed is full of water, it bursts open and pushes that seed coat out so that the roots can start to grow, or so that the plant can start to grow.
A
Yeah.
bit ago it just cut out, and it's cutting
Sweetheart-
out right
Sweetheart,
now.
I understand it's because of our internet, but please wait, okay? It'll be fine.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay. Okay, so then when the plants start to grow after that seed process, they are going to grow some roots. So the roots will take hold in the soil, and eventually the plant will start to burst kind of out of the soil. And when it does that, we say that the seed has sprouted. So when it's underground, it might be germinated, but when it is above ground at first, it's sprouting. And this is when the plant is growing and it's starting to make its own food from nutrients and other things that are in the soil. So the seed, as I told you before, has a lot of nutrients and instructions in it, but those don't last forever. It's kind of like a suitcase for the plant. And after that suitcase is empty, the plant has to start making its own food. And so you'll see the roots are kind of spreading out here, and that's a really important thing because plants need water. And they also need soil. They need nutrients, which you can see someone up here is adding some fertilizer, which has nutrients. It needs sun, and it needs air. And with all 5 of those things, it will allow the plants to grow. And the coolest thing about them is that the nutrients and things allow the plants to create new cells within the plant, and that then organizes into different tissue types within the cell. And if they didn't have those things, they couldn't grow or survive. So all 5 of those things are really important to plants. So if you have a plant inside your house or maybe on your patio or something and it doesn't seem like it's growing well, it's probably missing out on one of these 5 things. It's unlikely to be missing out on air, right? Because we all have oxygen around us, and carbon dioxide. But it might not have the right soil type, or it might need nutrients, or more water or less water, or more sun or less sun, because all plants, although they need these things, they need different amounts of them. But one of the cool things is that once the plants are done eating all the food that they carry with them in their seed, and they're making their own food, they start to do something called photosynthesis. And you guys might know about photosynthesis. It's basically the process where the plant takes energy from the sun and is able to convert it into food. So you can see on this picture, the plant is bringing up water through its roots, and then the leaves are taking in carbon dioxide from the air and trapping energy from the sunlight. And then it uses that energy to turn those things into sugar and water. And so the plant then, oxygen, into sugars and oxygen. So then the plant releases more oxygen into the air, and the plant uses the sugar to keep growing. And so one of the really important things that plants do for us is take carbon dioxide in and give oxygen out. So it actually can be good for air quality in your house sometimes to have plants. It's probably not a huge difference, but they do release oxygen. And then also a lot of the oxygen that we're breathing in now comes from all the trees and plants and things around us, especially including algae. So algae is actually a type of plant that photosynthesizes, and algae is a really important source of oxygen. So after the plant is using all these sugars that it's creating to grow, it might put out a flower. And the basic purpose of a flower is not to look pretty or to smell pretty, although they do those things in a lot of cases, but it's to reproduce. And so flowers are kind of the reproductive organ of the plant. And they have pollen that contains genetic information that the plant needs to reproduce, as well as the ovary of the plant, which has more genetic information. And so what happens is we use pollinators, or pollinators that exist like bees or hummingbirds or some other kinds of animals, they can bring that pollen between different plants and cross-pollinate. And then that helps the plant reproduce because it's getting new genetic information. And once it does that, it can fruit. So fruit is the part of the flowering plant that contains the seeds. And the fruit, what it does is protects the seeds, and it can also help spread them around. So many fruits are good to eat, and we eat a lot of fruits like strawberries and tomatoes that you see here. But fruits are also eaten by a lot of animals, and small animals like birds or squirrels really like these things. So it can be hard to keep them out of our gardens, right, when we're trying to grow things for ourselves. But the idea is that they'll eat the fruits, and then the seeds can pass through their bodies. So they kind of poop out the seeds, and they usually poop them out somewhere else, right, far away. And that means that the seeds can get spread around. And if the fruits are eaten and the seeds are spread around, that's one way for them to transfer. But another way is that the plant will actually release the seeds on its own. So in this case, there's a seed in the middle of an avocado. And that's one where the seed would get dispersed by a plant or by an animal or something eating it. But the fruits or the fruiting body of the plant can also kind of burst open on its own. And sometimes they'll do really cool things where this one bursts open and you can see there's some little fluffy guys on there. So it might travel or disperse by the wind. So things like milkweed and dandelions or the little helicopters that we see on maple trees can be spread out by the wind. They can be spread by animals, so that's fruits that we eat, or then things when the seeds stick to us. Like when you're outside, you might see little seeds that get stuck to your clothes, and that's actually where the idea from Velcro came from, because they have little tiny hooks on them that can hook to fabric. They might get spread by water, as in the case of cattails or coconuts that can float on the water. They could burst and kind of shoot the seeds out, which is what I was talking about before. And one of my favorites that does that are violets. So those are little tiny seeds because they can kind of burst out and be dispersed. And then they can also be transferred by humans. So when we're growing and breeding plants to change them, we're actually dispersing those seeds and we're carrying them around. And if you think about it, if you're buying seeds at the garden store and then planting them, you're dispersing seeds as part of the ecosystem. So once that all happens, unfortunately, usually the plant ends up dying after that once it's dispersed its seeds. But if you think about it, now that cycle can start over again, right? Because the plant has sent its baby seeds out into the world, and that one plant could turn into hundreds of new plants or thousands, depending on how many seeds there are. So it's a really cool cycle that can keep going around and around and around. And on some plants, the plant doesn't die all the way. Maybe just that part of the plant will die. And you can cut it back and it will use energy and pull energy from the roots and things like that to create new flowers and fruiting bodies. So part of the reason that you might see people out trimming off dying flowers in their garden is because if they trim off those flowers before they take all of the energy and turn it into fruit and seeds, then the plant will just keep growing more flowers in a lot of cases. So we can kind of interrupt this cycle to almost make things more pretty for us, which is pretty cool. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some common garden plants that you guys might see, and I'm going to divide them into some different types for you. So the first type that I want to talk about is vegetables. And I know a lot of you said that you have vegetable gardens growing, and here's some really common things that we grow in our garden, right? There's lettuce, there's radishes, there's some underground plants like carrots, and these are all really easy to grow. And they've all been manipulated by humans. So we've been breeding them for so long that we've bred them to do really specialized things. So we've decided that we want maybe the leaves to be extra large for us to eat, or we want the tubers that grow beneath the ground and store energy to be extra large, like in potatoes or in carrots. And that way we get to eat a lot of the nutrients from the plant, and we grow and breed them in our gardens. The downside is that these are also really tasty for other animals, right? So I know in my garden, I have an ongoing battle going on with the squirrels who like to eat my special plants.
We have a fence around our garden so that the deer, because we have a lot of deer where we live, so we have this tall fence so that the deer can't get in.
Yep. Deer can be a big problem. I used to, when I lived in Wisconsin, had a very persistent woodchuck that liked to eat all of my plants. And then I had to have a second fence for bunnies. Yes.
In our garden, we grow onions, courgettes,
Mm-hmm.
tomatoes,
Cedron peppers,
Ooh.
broccoli.
broccoli,
Oh, I love broccoli.
and lettuce.
Cool. Yeah, so there's lots of different things you can choose to grow, and you can grow them based on what you like to eat. So I really like to grow spinach, and I like to grow broccoli a lot, but I don't really grow courgettes, or we call them zucchini here. They're not my favorite, so I generally don't grow those, but sometimes I grow foods for like my mom or things because she really likes radishes. So you can pick and choose what kinds of vegetables you grow, and it also depends on what area you live in. So if you guys remember from those maps, it might change what kinds of things you grow, because some things need a really long growing season to mature. Like melons need a pretty long time to mature, but spinach turns over pretty fast. So it's a good thing to check. So thank you for bringing that up, Carmen and Inez. That's an important point, that you can grow different things. So other things you might have in your garden, and you might have them with vegetables, are flowers. And one of the things that I usually planted, I'm not sure if it's on this, were marigolds, because marigolds tend to keep away certain kinds of pests. So some flowers grow really well with certain kinds of vegetables, and there are pairs that kind of help each other out. Two of my favorite flowers that I wanted to show here are called Johnny Jump Ups, and those are these little purple and yellow guys. Those are one of my favorites. And then this is called Foxglove. And I think I showed this on the How Medicines Are Made class. Foxglove produces a compound called digitalis that is actually used as a heart medicine, but it can also be poisonous. So it's good to keep in mind that plants that you have growing in your garden, you shouldn't eat them unless you're 100% sure you know what they are and that you know that they're safe. But
Megan,
yes.
we've got sunflowers.
Oh yeah. Sunflowers are cool because they're a flower, but you can also eat them, right? So you can harvest the seeds for a snack. And I used to buy sunflower heads to give to my chickens sometimes as a treat, because they like to jump up and grab the seeds. So that's a tasty kind of veggie / flower that you can grow. So not all flowers are just ornamental. Some of them have purposes too, like eating.
We've got lots of flowers in the garden.
Oh, cool. Well, one of your assignments might be to take some pictures of them, so you can do that.
Okay.
So another thing you might have in your garden are vines. And vines just mean that they're either climbing or trailing plants. So they have kind of really long stems that extend out. And you can see here, someone has built a kind of trellis or an arch for the vined plants to grow up and over. And I really like these, especially in California. A lot of people grow this on the left, which is jasmine. And I think it smells absolutely beautiful. Lots of our neighbors have them. Ava, do you guys have some jasmine?
Yes, we do, right outside near our front door.
Yeah.
And then dog loves jumping in the middle of them.
That's silly. Yeah, so this is a really popular plant in California, but it's not grown in Wisconsin because it gets too cold in the winters for it to survive. So when you go to different places, you might see different kinds of plants depending on how cold it gets. And I was really excited when I moved here to see all the jasmine. So people also grow trees in their garden. So the trees that are at your house might have been planted a long time before you were born or before your parents were born. They might be really old, but you know, they might also have been planted recently. And we plant a lot of decorative trees. They're called ornamental, which means they're pretty much for looking at. And this one on the right here, it's a little Japanese maple, and you can see it has really beautiful red leaves. And then there's a little small tree over here with variegated or striped or different colored leaves. And so there's a bunch of little trees that we can plant to look pretty or to give us shade at our houses, or we can plant trees because they give us food. And those trees are usually fruit trees.
Megan.
Yes.
We've got in our house in our garden, lots of trees.
Yeah, trees are great because they allow animals to have a habitat to live in, and they provide shade and fresh air for us. And if you have fruit trees, they can also give you things like apples or oranges or cherries or pears. There's tons of different fruits that grow on trees. And if you're in somewhere colder, like, if you're on the East Coast, you might have apple trees. Down in California, we have a lot of these citrus trees. Yes,
Oh,
Olivia.
we have a bunch of trees lined up in our backyard, and one fell down
Ooh,
like a month ago.
yep, that can also cause an issue, because one of the things that we use trees for as well is for privacy or for sound. So a wall of trees or a wall of shrubs, which I will cover in a little bit, can actually block out sounds or block out vision from your neighbors. And so it's a nice kind of natural fence for you to have.
We've got that.
We do have a lot of apple trees on the East Coast because every year we go pick apples.
Yeah, we used to do that in Wisconsin too. I like it a lot. Some of the trees you might see here in California, though, or if you're down in like Florida, are palm trees. And there's a ton of different types of palm trees. And this is silly, but I didn't realize how many different types of palm trees there were until I moved here. Some are really short and fat, and some are super, super tall and skinny. And then some are kind of in the middle. And then there's some really fancy decorative ones too. So people can put these in their garden, and this one's in a botanical garden. And you see this kind of short little stubby guy, and here's some long tall guys, but there's tons of different varieties of palm trees that people have out. More common on the East Coast and in other colder places are evergreens. And evergreen, or like pine trees, we might call them, basically just means that instead of regular wide leaves, they have needles. And those needles usually have a waxy coating on them. And this is like kind of a Christmas tree is an evergreen that we would normally see. So a lot of people grow evergreens in their gardens because they're green all year round, which is really nice. If you live in somewhere or live somewhere where there's cold winters and you look out on your garden, it might be nice to see something green instead of just everything kind of brown and dead. So a lot of people, especially in Wisconsin, grow evergreens. And you can see some of them are not quite so green, but they're a really pretty silvery blue color, like this blue spruce. And that's actually one of my favorite Christmas trees too. So there's a whole bunch of different kinds that you can have. And a lot of people will kind of frame them around the outside, or they'll have evergreens in what's called a shrub form. And a shrub or a bush is just kind of a small or a medium-sized plant with woody stems on it. So instead of having plant material stems where it's kind of green and soft, they have woody stems. So that means they kind of stay around all year. And some of them might drop some of their leaves, like box shrubs. But if they're evergreen, you can have cool little green shrubs all year round, and they might be carved into cool colors or cool shapes too. So you might see them in balls or squares or like a hedgerow, or sometimes even topiaries where they're sculpted into crazy things like animals and fish and all sorts of cool stuff. So you might also have grasses in your garden, and there's different kinds of grasses. So the first one that we usually think of is kind of a ground cover. So it means it's a really short kind of thick grass that we walk on, like this nice green stuff right here. But then there's also ornamental grasses, which means that they're kind of pretty grasses that are more for looking at than for walking on. So we wouldn't want to grow this all over our lawn or all over a golf course because we wouldn't be able to use that space very well. But ornamental grasses, yeah?
I'm allergic to that kind of grass, the tall kind
Yeah.
that you like find on beaches or like.
Yeah. So these kinds of grasses release, pollen and seeds just like everything else. And so we can have allergies to them. But there are some really pretty types that are kind of purplish looking or kind of silver or have these cool fluffy ends. There's a lot of different types of ornamental grasses that you can get to decorate your garden. And then one of my favorites are succulents. And succulents just are types of plants that grow in places where there's not a lot of water. So they have thickened kind of fat leaves that store a lot of moisture, and then they don't need to get watered that often. So they're really common here in California, where we try not to use a lot of water. And these two pictures actually I took. This is on top of one of those little free libraries. And this is in my friend's neighborhood where I walk her dog. And you can see they have a little succulent garden growing on top of their little free library, which I thought was super cool. And they've got a bunch of different kinds of echeveria and like I think there's a little aloe back here. They're pretty neat, different varieties. And they can come in all sorts of different colors and shapes.
Megan,
Yes.
my favorite plant. We've got,
Yeah.
Carmen and me have got one of those that are in them, just that in another color. In
Oh, cool.
green.
Yeah, and sometimes the colors change.
We can take a picture of it and
Yeah.
send it.
That'd be cool. So one of the other things about these is they'll change color depending on how much sunlight they're getting too. So if they're getting a lot of sun, they might be a little bit more reddish. And you can see this picture over here is in my garden, and it's underneath. This is a shelf for all of my plants. And if you see right here, does anybody see that?
Yeah, your cat.
Yeah, it's a little sneaky kitty cat. She likes to hide in there where it's shady sometimes with all my succulents. And you can see mine are all quite green, and this one has a little red at the tips because these are on a shadier part of my balcony, or not a balcony, a patio.
I have a bunch of succulents in my room near my window because they're so easy to take care of.
Yeah, they're very easy to take care of. The thing you have to watch out with succulents is not to overwater them, because if you water them too much, they can actually rot and die, and I've had some issues with that. But here's another view of, I've killed a bunch of them accidentally. Here's another view of my succulent shelf, and you can see this one's a burro's tail that's getting really big and will actually trail over. There's a pretty echeveria, and there's another one here that's flowering. And then there's some really funny guys, like this looks like a little pyramid, and you can see this guy looks like alien fingers. There's so many different kinds of succulents that people really like to collect them, and they like to grow them. And so there's special nurseries you can go to buy them. And I really love to do that. As you can see, this is only a very small part of how many I have on my balcony. They're pretty cool. And people will also grow them frequently in their gardens here. Because they don't require a lot of water, we call them drought tolerant, or if a drought just means it hasn't rained for a really long time. And so they will keep growing in those conditions. And so a lot of people around here have them planted in their gardens with some nice mulch around, because if you're growing grass in your garden, it really needs a lot of water to stay healthy. And so to save water, people will plant succulents, or they'll plant cacti. So cacti are kind of similar to succulents, where they are really thick and they hold a lot of moisture inside. This is a saguaro cactus in the Arizona desert. And then this is Aiden. And Aiden, who are you holding there?
It is my cactus.
What's his name?
Fred.
Fred. That's Aiden's cactus, Fred. And we've had him since last year. And when we bought him, he was just this big kind of circle guy in the middle. And you can see Fred, or I guess Frederina, I'm not sure what, Fred is having many babies. And so we're going to have to repot Fred soon, because Fred is outgrowing his little container. So this guy only gets watered when it rains outside. I don't really do anything to take care of him, and I just let him live his natural life. And because of the area I live in, where cacti can actually grow, that's fine. If I was somewhere like Wisconsin, he would probably get too much water. So this would be a plant that I would have to have inside there. Because if you remember, we had those 5 things that plants need: water, air, sun, nutrients, and soil. And Fred would get too much water if he was in Wisconsin, for sure. Okay.
We both have a little cactus like Fred.
Yeah.
His died right away because he watered him too much, but mine only died like a week ago, and we've had them for like 2 years.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good streak to keep them going. Okay, guys, so now we're going to talk about activities for Monday. So for little kids, you guys can draw a seed that's germinating. You can take a picture with a flower in your garden, or you can plant a seed at home. So if you want to start your own little garden or plant some seeds, I would love to see it. For big kids, you can draw and label the 5 things that plants need. You can make a comic about seeds germinating, or you can write a few sentences about the life cycle of plants. And then middle schoolers, you can either take a picture with at least 5 different kinds of plants in your garden or in your neighborhood and tell me what kind they are. You can write a paragraph about the 5 things that plants need, or you can create a comic about the life cycle of plants. And then as always, you guys can email your homework to me to win a gift card. And there's a couple resources I have on here, and I will share them with you when I send out the email.
Megan,
Yes.